Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from here on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions, where I guarantee you're not going to get any fake news here. Okay. The topic I'd like to deal with today, I think, is a very important one, and it seems to be something that either the mainstream media tends to forget or that it tends to ignore. Not always, as I will bring up later. There are examples of some media that deal with it, but by and large, they don't. And that has to do with the disproportionate harm that today's economic trends are having upon specifically the working and the middle class of this nation. Now, before I begin, this is not going to be some sort of class warfare type of presentation. Instead, what I'd like to do is really analyze why we're at where we're at and what we can do to reverse this. Because ultimately, unless we don't, we're going to wind up with a two-class society in which we're going to have the super poor and the super rich and nothing in between. And you know, that's the kind of society I describe in my science fiction novel. It's a dystopian novel, but you can look it up. You know, it's called The Destiny of Our Past. You can Google Destiny of Our Past. You can check out Amazon and read the description there. But ultimately, it deals with this same subject of kind of a disconnected upper elite, but basically using many of the strategies we see in today's society to keep the rest of the society down, with ultimately the goal being to eliminate them. But you can check that out later. So anyway, what I would like to do now is just kind of see where we used to be and where we're at now. And ultimately, I think a lot of us can remember back to the 1970s. It was a time when, at least where I went to school, there was a great deal of optimism. Nobody really felt this kind of malaise. I know Jimmy Carter talked about a malaise, but it really wasn't so much of the depression you see in today's society, especially young people. And so you saw young people striving to get good grades, but they also, the ones that just knew they could do good, hard labor, were more than happy that when they got out of high school, they'd get a job at the local factory or plant or whatever. But that doesn't exist anymore. In the 1980s, you saw the gradual decline of the major industries of America, first due to the competition with more modern, for instance, steel plants in Japan. And also the Japanese started, kind of getting a corner on the cheaper car market. And that kind of caught our car companies by surprise. I think to a certain degree there was a level of arrogancy in our big automakers, which you could call an oligopoly at that time. It kind of still is. But what happened was you had this kind of, shift in our economy. You saw a lot of our big industries, such as steel and car manufacturing, starting to decline, and more imports coming in at that time, primarily from Japan, although some from Europe. You saw a lot of environmental law passed that meant that you started the process of closing off forest to timber harvest. You saw mining restricted as more land was put under government control and later government protection. And it was just little by little by little by little. But then in the 1990s, you saw something major, and that was when that was when the U.S. corporations started looking to China as China was starting to open up for business, and there was pressure, there was pressure on government leaders, Bill Clinton and Congress and the Senate, to open up trade with China. And what happened was there were bills passed and signed into law by Bill Clinton that made trade extremely easy. But what happened was not so much that a lot of products started being made in America and then shipped to China. They couldn't afford those kinds of things. They were still in a bicycle economy where very few people owned cars at that time. And appliances, well, appliances could mean going out and washing your clothes at either in the sink or at a local stream. I've seen that many times when I was in China back around 2001. And what happened was corporations started seeing that you had an extremely educated, hardworking population, that they could manufacture things for a teeny fraction of the cost of manufacturing in the United States. And so what happened was many corporations started moving there. And so you started seeing a shift from made in Japan when it came to less expensive items to made in China. And this process has continued and continued. Now, of course, there's other factors that have come in. For instance, automation. Okay, there's a major amount of jobs that have disappeared because of automation. But we cannot ignore the fact that outsourcing, okay, both, via the internet later, and as well as corporations moving and setting up factories in Indonesia, China, Vietnam, and so forth, that has been a major blow to primarily the working middle class. And I put the two together, I guess, to make a distinction between the working middle class and the middle class is, I would say that most of the working middle class, you have a situation in which, I don't know if you could put like an income level, maybe let's just say makes less than $100,000 a year. And I mean that as a household income, combined husband and wife income. And maybe, these are all arbitrary. And maybe the middle professional class are people that have jobs that they either own their own companies or they have jobs that are professional, in which, they're like doctors and dentists and psychologists and educators and so forth, although educators can kind of fluctuate between classes there. Now, the class that I would say is hurt the most and is most vulnerable is the lower middle class. And here's the reasons why. And this is something I think a lot of our lawmakers really don't have a connection to, because most of them, even if they did grow up in less affluent circumstances, they don't really look back and see what their roots were. But most of our congressmen and senators and judges and people that have the prestigious professorships at universities and are people that control the media, they did not come from the working class. That's something that kind of died out with, maybe if you had professors back in the 1970s and 80s, they might say, yeah, my dad was a coal miner or something like that. But most of the time now, that's not the case. So anyway, let's just see why maybe you're seeing populism, and I mean that by both left-wing and right-wing populism, growing amongst these classes, because I think ultimately what happens is if you start seeing that your livelihood is in danger, that's when you start questioning the system. You see, this is a very interesting point that Maslow brought up in his hierarchy of needs. Essentially, if your lower needs are met, food, shelter, security, those kinds of things, that means you can think about higher order reasoning. That doesn't mean that people that are poor don't have reasoning. I'm just saying that what preoccupies someone who's poor is survival. And if they feel comfortable, that's when they start thinking about things like, well, any number of things, religion, intellectual pursuits, deeper studies into, any number of things, because then you feel like you're secure enough to do so. Now, so essentially, if you're fed and satisfied, you'll accept the assumptions behind the system, okay? More for the most part. Now, here's a difference between the classes, and I'm going to be very general on this before I go into a deeper analysis. Now, let's say you're poor, and you've grown up poor, and your frame of reference is poverty. Then you adapt to it. That doesn't necessarily mean you want to live that way, but to a certain degree, you don't know how to get out of it. You may watch TV, and TV has been a factor that's probably created a lot of anxiety and depression amongst people in poverty, because you can afford a TV, and it's kind of that peephole into paradise, as what was it, Michael Reagan talk show used to refer to it as. And the thing is that, you see rich people and so forth, and you see what you don't have. But ultimately, your surroundings and so forth, you're going to think in these terms. I was talking to someone just in reference to the issue of teenage pregnancy. If your mother had you when she was 16 and you grew up in those circumstances and you don't feel that you have the opportunity to go to university or to train for a job that's greater than your mom's, you may not be as apt to see a pregnancy in the sense of, oh my gosh, now my future is really going to be altered. And so this may explain, I think it does explain, why, for instance, very poor people tend to, if they get pregnant, they tend to have babies. And because there is this sense, first of all, that, you see people around you that have been in the similar circumstances and they've pulled through. But you also see what is the opportunity cost. Okay, well, if your highest level of aspiration outside of maybe some sort of government assistance type situation is to get a job at a convenience store or any number of low-paying jobs, then actually having a baby may not be seen as an earth-shattering sort of thing at a young age. So, because then you can just go ahead and pick up later. As opposed to if you're a young woman coming from a middle-class background and you get pregnant when you're 16, then you may be, more inclined to abort or try to find some other option than raising this kid, because ultimately you're going to, if your goal is you're going to become a doctor someday, then this is going to really, really interfere with that. So it doesn't make it impossible, but it's going to make it a lot harder. So ultimately, many I've seen some studies that have actually said that one of the big factors of the many that are out there that influence a person's decision to engage, for instance, in premarital sex at a young age is often their aspirations. If they plan on going to university, then they are more likely to abstain because it adds that extra what if to the equation. Versus if you're not really you don't really have any of those kinds of plans, then it may not, that one factor may not be there to tilt the balance towards saying no or avoiding the situation in the first place. Okay, but ultimately the poor may not like where they're at, but they have adapted to a large degree to the social circumstances that surround them. So, it's not like, suddenly finding yourself like a fish out of water if something major might happen to you. Now, the lower middle class and the working class, okay, usually there's they come from a situation in which their parents were able to maintain a home, a car, put food on the table, and they may have to work and come home sweaty and dirty and having to throw the clothes in the washer and dryer that evening, but they still managed. Again, you're used to what your parents had and your surrounding situation. And by the way, I will note that social mobility in the United States, it's not as common as we often believe. Usually, most people stay within their social class, generation after generation. There is mobility and there are opportunities, but it's not like each generation just suddenly pops up, and winds up richer and richer. But we still have that kind of goal. Maybe if you're a coal miner, for those left from the Obama regulation years, if you're a coal miner, you might like it if your kid gets an education and maybe they become, maybe your daughter becomes a kindergarten teacher. Now, that's going to be a job that requires her to use her mind and those kinds of skills. It's not going to be as dangerous as working in a coal mine. But economically, it may not be that much more money. So you're still sort of in that economic strata. But let's go on here. You expect what your parents had. You want more for your kids. And you also, now this is very important, I'm going to come back to this, you see certain obligations must be in place for reproduction. Okay? So often, if amongst this class, if a young man and a young woman do mess up when they're 17 maybe or something like that and get pregnant, there's a certain sense that, well, the guy is going to be at least like, well, I guess maybe we have to get married. And we need to, we need to see what we can do here. Now, yes, there is a lot of abortions that take place and so forth, but in many cases, I've known many people from, who are working class who, they just out of high school, wind up pregnant, didn't expect it, get married. Some of them didn't work out. Some of them still married today. But, there is these senses for most of the working class that, the guy's thinking, okay, I've got to have a job. I've got to have a good job. Something I can support my family with. The woman nowadays, she's feeling like, well, I've got to have a nice job too. But there still is that expectation on men that you've got to be kind of the one who, you definitely have to have something that is at least a job that could maintain a certain level of subsistence in the event that, for instance, she's pregnant, can't work, you could still pay the bills. And the marriage rate, now I'll note this, young marriage and divorce rate amongst this particular social class has plummeted since 2009. I mean, it was already going down steadily because economic opportunities were going down steadily. But after 2009, free fall, and it has not recovered. Because this particular class are the canaries in the coal mine, so to speak. They're the ones that are going to have the symptoms hit first. They're not used to this. This is where, if you're unemployed, there is a huge social stigma against it. And because, everyone, your family, your parents and grandparents still have that idea that, just got to go out there and burn some shoe leather and, find yourself a job somewhere. The problem is, if you do find a job that happens not to pay that much, you're using all your time working, still not being able to really amass any kind of money, but you don't have the money to try, you don't have the free time to find better work if it is out there or to train for something better. And sadly, this particular class of people usually come from families that make enough money that they don't qualify for a lot of those grants and scholarships that are available for the poor. But at the same time, since many of them, when they're in high school, do have to kind of get out there and work a part-time job or something, they may not have as much time to devote to their studies so they can get those kind of academic scholarships that might be available for straight A students who also are active in extracurricular activities. So ultimately, the working class has been hit really hard. And I'm going to come back to an article that was in a recent Bloomberg that deals with this in just a few minutes. Now, the middle class, let's say the professional class, I'm not going to say they have not been hurt by this situation, the economics and so forth. But because most of them have college educations or have been successful enough to have some sort of business of their own, their options are much greater. So even psychologically, they don't fear, losing a job in the same way that someone might if they've been working 20 years at a steel plant, or a car manufacturing plant, or a mine, or something like that. So they're also, and it's also not just a psychological thing, they do have the ability to find other types of employment. And so this particular class has been, it's been harmed after 2009 for that first couple of years. They were slaughtered by the economic situation. But I remember back then reading stories about lots of people from nice neighborhoods, and they were having to move from houses into apartments and having to, basically take their dogs and cats in to be put to sleep because they couldn't find apartments that would take their dogs and cats if they moved in. But there's been a certain rebound amongst this class. And if they do drop a little bit, they're still at a high enough level that they have a very comfortable existence. And also, most of them have they do have the avenues of which to educate their children, to send them to school. So their kids, at least when they're 14 and maybe they're wanting to do something like spend all day on social media or go out and hang out with their friends, the parents can still say, look, you got to get your grades up, because if your grades are higher, then you'll be able to get into a better university. So there is that kind of motivation pushing them along. Now, this particular class, when it comes to them getting out of university, though, it's been difficult for many of the kids who have no experience because they haven't had to work. Note when the birth rates plummeted in the United States during the 70s and 80s, what happened was this kind, you went from, those of us who may have been born in the 1960s, and so most of us, or our friends, we remember our friends usually had, two siblings or three siblings, and so often you had to have a little job on the side to make a little extra money. This particular class of people, it's not as important for them to tell their one or two kids that they need to go get a job down at the local donut shop, or if they want to afford doing stuff with their friends in the summer. So they don't have work experience, but yet they do have college degrees. The thing I'm getting at here in regards to sons and daughters of the professional class, to show that they're not totally immune to what's going on, although they do have a little bit more, I hate to use that word, privilege, because of the way it's been misused by many people in current political debates. But ultimately, they do have a little bit more comfortable setting and alternatives. However, many of the children of this particular economic group still are under the impression that all college majors are equal. So maybe their parents, one or both of them, might have a major in, one of the liberal arts areas in which if you want to actually get a job in, with a degree in liberal arts, it often means you have to go for an advanced degree, a master's or a PhD. But many of them wind up with having a degree that they can't really market that well. Now, I did say the thing about privilege, and so maybe, mom and dad have a really nice home that, they can live in for a while until they find something that they can actually work at. Or they just have to go ahead and give in and work for mom or dad in their business. But, selling out, as they used to say in the 1960s. But ultimately, this class, even though they have been, I would say, stunted by recent economic developments, they may have a certain advantage through their connections, because often it's our networks in which we get connections to jobs. I read somewhere where half the people were introduced to their husband or wife by a friend. But, you do have things about business connections. That's very important through networking. That's why a lot of times people used to join lodges. Not so much that they were into the various rituals and so forth, but because they made connections with local people who were influential. And the other advantages, too, is perhaps you have the money to be able to afford to even travel to another country and get work. So you're a little bit more mobile. Plus, usually through your educational background, these options have been presented as options. Whereas, if you go to school in a high school that's mostly lower middle class or working class, you're probably not going to be given the same, the same types of future vision. I don't say supervision, that's future vision that you would get in an upper class school. In an upper class school, but even public one, if you're in a nice neighborhood, there's going to be this sense of, maybe when you graduate high school, you're going to do that trip to Europe or Asia before going to university. You're going to have this idea that you may know people whose parents, or these people directly, that have some sort of jobs that are international in scope. But the people that go to school in middle class homes, or lower middle class and working class, their connection may be more in line with, oh yes, I have a brother or an uncle who travel the world because they're in the Navy or something like that. And so ultimately they're not going to have that same set of possibilities presented to them. And they may not take part in things where they will build these kinds of networks. All right? And so I have a daughter that went to a conference recently in Europe. And when she was in this conference, she was able to get a lot of friends. And these were people from all over the world. And for someone who's younger, they may feel like, well, this is just fun. I have more communication I can do. But maybe in the future, there may be opportunities where you have this kind of networking. So, there was an advantage for me having some connections to where I could arrange for this. The same with my sons. I had a son that went to a conference in China, and now he works in China. Even though he was 15 when he first went to China, it made it a possibility. But this is not very common for people on that lower middle class and working class background. The thing that I would like you to maybe take a look at, and you just have to Google it. Google Bloomberg, young white America is haunted by a crisis of despair. Now, I'm not trying to contribute to this despair right now, because I said I'm going to talk more about what people can do to counter this in their life or the lives of their children or grandchildren, okay? But it does point out some of the things that I have said, that you often judge yourself according to the people around you. And so if there are declining opportunities, but yet the people that graduated or got work when your parents were your age, and they have this expectation that you'll do the same, then that can create a lot of depression and anxiety. I talked about this, it's not in the article, but I talked about this in a previous show. It even decreases your testosterone levels. And whereas we usually associate testosterone with sexual characteristics, it's also associated with aggressiveness. And I mean that in a positive sense. If you feel down and you're in despair, as this article's pointing out, then you lower your immune system, you lower your competitive edge. So even if you do get called in for a job interview, you're not going to have that same stamina and charisma and that fighting spirit that often a potential boss is looking for. So this just compounds the situation. So if you've had a few interviews, then it's sort of like, well, I got to go to another one. And so this is a problem. Now, often when we get these images of people unemployed or underemployed, we start thinking what it must be doing to the marriage. But here's something interesting about millennials, especially of the group I talked about, the lower educated, perhaps, with not with the masters and PhDs and so forth, and the basically the people who just have found themselves in a spot where they're in trouble, maybe economically. Who knows? They may have like $100,000 in student loans, and there's no way that they can figure out how they're going to pay for those working at a hamburger flipping joint. And they can't afford the money or get the opportunity to perhaps get a higher degree or even to switch into a different sort of major. I've read about a lot of people who have, though, they maybe get a 4-year degree in, I don't know, let's just throw it out, history or sociology or something like that. And then they're kind of like, well, now what? They're in debt. They have this degree that they can't get work in. So they go back and get a job in computer programming, or they get a job, they learn how to do plumbing or welding or something like that. The irony is if they get those kinds of jobs, because those jobs are not slated to be replaced by robots and automation for a very long time. So the irony is that the people who do find get this kind of employment where they know how to fix things, make things, that sort of thing, not part of the factory system, I might add. But like I said, plumbers and so forth, they make good money and they have a lot more potential when it comes to saving and being able to show stability, get married, buy a home, and so forth. So that's something, though, our culture looks down on. It's like, in fact, in schools. Now, you got to remember, I want people to remember this. All of the people you ever had as a teacher were more than likely college degree holders. Often, especially in the high school level, they had something like a master's degree or a PhD. Now, the irony here is they're seeing the world from their eyes. Oh, you need to go get a college education or you're not going to succeed. Now, true, if you graduate with nothing and you have no ambition to go out there and get something else, then you may then you may be in a lot of trouble if you're just going to grab a job and work because you like that money and it's fun, but there's not the stability in it. You might want to consider that usually the reason why your teachers aren't saying, well, yeah, you should look into the blue collar line of work, is because those teachers don't know anyone who's blue collar. They may not even be from families where there's anyone with blue collar. backgrounds. So therefore, their way of seeing the world is through go to school, get an education, and so forth. But not everyone can be a teacher, okay? There's a glut of teachers. I don't care what you hear about propaganda-wise. Unless you're like a really, 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 really good math teacher or special ed or something like that, you're going to have a hard time getting work as a teacher. That doesn't mean it's impossible. It's just difficult in the United States to land a teaching job. But I can make a whole show about that. Anyway, something's very interesting, though, that maybe makes a difference between when people maybe in the 50s lost a job. And it did happen. Things happen if you lived in a small community, especially. And today here's a quote. A very, very interesting quote in reference to, some of the problems a person can face. It states, meanwhile, marriage is happening later and less often. Religious affiliation and union membership have declined. So when life doesn't work out well for millennials, they're on their own. And let's think about this. Many of these millennials have been raised in families where they're the only kid. Or maybe they have a brother or sister. I don't know. But think about that. I've read about the depression being lower in Mexican immigrants, first-generation immigrants, much lower than that of the Anglo or black populations in the United States. It catches up with them, the next generation. But when they first move in, though, they often come from, at least traditionally, large families. Now, the advantage of that, even though, you learn how to fight, and that's actually a good thing, in a sense. I mean, animals, when they're cubs or whatever, they fight each other, and then they, work together, and they fight each other. And this is part of growing up. We have this kind of daytime psychology pop TV culture that's like, we got to make sure our kids are this, and this, and this. We got neurotic parents who are listening to this kind of stuff, and we have a situation in which the fighting spirit is kind of lowered. Oh, speaking of fighting spirit, I got to say this. Come on. I was talking to someone recently. He is 19 years old. And I said, well, what do they do in PE nowadays? I remember when I was in physical education, we had that, we had the tough, get out there and run around the track. And if you come in last, you got to run an extra lap, type of teaching. But I'll guarantee you, everyone, sweat at the end of that. You had to go in, take a shower, the whole thing, It was a workout. And the idea was that this would help people be in shape and to respect getting in shape. And he said, well, the only thing we have to do is, like, for instance, where I went to school, and this was in California, is get the little badminton, what they call it, puck or whatever it is, over the net, and also take a short quiz on the rules of badminton. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, what about the whole running around the track, and what about this? And he's like, well, no, we don't do that anymore. Well, we didn't do it at our school. I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, you've got to have a situation where you challenge people. But we don't have challenges anymore. So you get someone that's growing up, in a situation where maybe they don't have to go out and work, whatever. They're in, they have maybe one sibling or maybe no siblings. And then when they get to be adults, they wind up in a situation in which, if things go wrong for them, who do they call up? As opposed to, let's say, the Mexican family, I have 5 brothers and sisters. They call up and say, hey, I'm having some trouble. And one of them says, hey, for now I can get you a job where I work. Come on in and put an application in. You don't have that advantage so much if you're from one of these small families. And then we throw in religion. Now, what I said about the fraternal organizations holds true for religion too. Often, someone at your church, and then you can go in and say, hey, I can't find work, or, I just got laid off, or whatever. And then some churches, they have someone in the church whose job it is to, find some employment for you. It's kind of that networking thing I was talking about. If you're a member of a lot of organizations, be it church, synagogue, mosque, fraternal organization, union, as they state here in this article,
and the most important organization is your family, that's going to help you out a lot. You're going to feel better when things are going wrong. You're going to have someone to turn to if things continue to be wrong. And you have a much greater chance of fixing the wrong things. Okay? And our culture has really gotten around that. And that's not a good thing. Now, I've presented the problem. I mean, the problem is ultimately that if we want to perpetuate our culture as it is, then we need to get working on fixing what's going wrong now. I predict this. I predict that in Western Europe and the United States, you are going to go through a period in which the far right and the far left are going to pick up steam. They're going to get more support. And if they don't fix that, the problem will get even worse. Okay? Because much of the problems in the United States and Europe are the same, and they stem from the same globalization in which the people that have been left behind are the ones of the lower classes. And, basically because our cultures revolve around the cult of consumerism. That, hey, if I can get lots of stuff, that measures how good I am. And so the marketers play on all those neuroses, and you go out and buy and buy and buy, and, it's never enough. But if you get it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, you don't care. In fact, the quality even goes down. You don't care if I can buy 20 of something for what I used to pay for one, but that one would have lasted your whole lifetime, but the 20, it breaks, and then you replace it, and so forth. Our culture is so ingrained in this at the top. Let's make more and more money and more profits, less and less workers, more and more profits. And you've got the other classes going, I want things cheap. In fact, whether you agree with his policies or not, Trump did come out and encourage people to buy American. And I noticed a lot of people in social media were like, oh, this is so old-fashioned and blah, 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 and really criticizing it. Well, I'm sorry that if you live in America and people aren't buying American stuff, you're not going to put Americans to work. Okay? Not everyone can work at a coffee shop. All right? Not everyone can be a social worker, and not everyone can be a teacher. In fact, you're going to need less teachers because not as many babies are being born right now, which means eventually you're going to be seeing more schools closing down and unemployment amongst teachers rise. So this is not going to work out unless we do try to go back and fix some things. Now, first of all, I would start, if I was Trump or, Senate or Congress, I would not be talking about free education. All right? Now, I understand that it's difficult to get a college education nowadays. But I know this would be very unpopular, and I know it wouldn't work because it wouldn't get through Congress and the Senate. But I would say that there should be an examination of what majors we need in the future, what majors are going to get you employment, and prioritize them for anything. I mean, whether it is grants to low-income college students, or if we do go for some sort of, voucher system. I wouldn't say just make college totally free, because then the colleges are going to jack up the cost and then lay the bill at the federal government. But maybe if you had some sort of voucher, stipendium system where you're allowed a certain amount of money, but maybe instead of majoring in underwater basket weaving or the anthropology of transgendered, Spartans or something back in the 3rd century. I don't think they had that, but anyway, I just had to think of something atrocious there. That you would instead have to use that for a trade school, a 2-year degree, or you would have to use that for a degree where, for instance, engineering or something in the medical field. So ultimately, we would be investing not in just some blanket, let's just send everyone to college and, many of them taking majors that will not get them jobs in the future, but instead we would be placing money where it would do the most good for building the economy later. And there will be a transition period that's going to take 20, 30 years before we start using robots to get rid of many of these skilled jobs, okay? The low-skilled jobs are going to go bye-bye. The upper-skilled jobs won't. Not so fast. And so therefore, that's where we should place our priorities. 2 is we need to start maybe looking back to the hippies. I'm not joking about this. You can look at whether it's the Mormons. I'm not talking about nowadays, because I don't think there's that big a difference when it comes to middle-class Mormons, when it comes to the way they see the world, and middle-class Baptist and middle-class atheist or whatever in regards to consumerism. However, I would say if we look back at the 19th century, the way the Mormons tried to pull together and have certain things in common and so forth, I think that could actually be something that would be advantageous for people to start considering. A family could get together and create some sort of idea for investments and so forth. And this works really good if it's a large family, so that you're pulling your resources together, and and even when it just comes to just buying food in bulk and saving money that way, we have to get past this whole consumerist ideal. Our society will die, and I mean that literally. And if the rest of the world becomes consumeristic, it will die. Now, I don't mean everyone's just going to lay down and die. I do mean, though, that they're going to die as an entity that will propel us to further and further advancement. Consumerism could be, likened to being a virus, okay? It's not a good thing. It's good at first, but it doesn't perpetuate itself, okay? It's like a young woman who decides, I'm going to go out and I'm just going to do all kinds of wonderful things for humanity, but she doesn't ever have children. Once she's dead, that legacy's gone. And if she had, maybe in theory had children and trained them with the same, we got to go out and save the world and help people, and then those children had that same ethic, I got to go out and, it would grow, and it would be a really great lineage of people helping and helping and helping. Instead, you get one person, does all these wonderful things at once, and it's over. Okay? That is not good, and that's what our culture is doing right now. We got great spreadsheets and profits and so forth, but it's going to end if we don't get back to pulling together in small communities first, meaning families, and then maybe network those families, and then go higher, and so forth. But that's where the concentration has to be. Think globally, act individually and locally, okay? More of a libertarian way of looking at it, but we can't just think of ourselves as total individuals. We have to work on being self-sustaining, strong individuals, but because we are part of a strong network. That's like if things did fall apart. Let's say we do go all Walking Dead and society collapses and all kinds of horrible things happen. Well, it's going to be much better to be in a network than it is going to be just sitting there going, I hope no one comes and raids my house. Okay? Networks provide security in times of peace, in times of war, in times of good, and times of bad. And we have to get back to that. We have to get also away from this idea of we have to be at a certain level before that we can consider forming families. Millennials can't wait till they're 50 in order to get married and start a family. Not going to work. Women don't have babies at 50, okay? Unless they had like an embryo put in them from a donor or something like that, and even then that costs a ton of money. So you got to have a system in which not a system, you have to start the ethic of people just figuring that, it may be hard at first. It may be a struggle at first, but that's what makes people stronger. Read up on all these married couples that have been married 50, 60, and 70 years. They didn't wait until they were financially secure. They just decided, you know what? We work together as a team. It's you and me against the world. And that's the way it has to be. All right? Not as individuals that just happen to come together and think, maybe we could make a good couple, but more of I'm on your team, you're on my team. And so let's get out there. And, in that respect, I'm going to give some respect here, someone I normally don't. And that's to Bill and Hillary Clinton. Look at what they've done, what they've accomplished together. I know people are going, some people are going, oh my gosh, what did he just say? But it is true. They worked together and achieved a lot more together than either of them would have achieved alone. We have to instill that in our young people today and then make sure that they don't look to the culture. The first thing the first thing we should be doing is encouraging people not to turn on the stupid TV. Get out of that TV habit. Television's toxic. It promotes the consumerism. That's toxic. It promotes superficiality, ignorance, a decline of civilization, because what you're shooting for is to get as many people that are, I guess, low information people who are more susceptible to buying stuff to watch your programs. So the program quality is decreasing, at least on the network shows. Okay? The only shows I watch are the ones that are on, produced on cable. Because they're, once in a while I like a little fantasy or something like that. And I find that they're much more intellectually stimulating. I'm not trying to be arrogant here. I'm just saying, I feel really weird if I sit and watch most network TV shows. I feel like, who is this made for? Seriously, who is this made for? People are, it's canned laughter, obviously, but people are laughing at that joke? You know what I mean? We got to get out of that. I'm saying pull away from the culture. Okay? And what I mean by the dominant culture. Become smaller, more closely united cultures in your church or synagogue or whatever. We got to pull away, because right now it's just like, think about it. Get an analogy that we're just like lemmings. Lemmings don't commit suicide. Okay? They just follow the crowd looking for new land to live on. So the young ones go out, because the burrows are all taken where they were raised, and they go out on a journey. Well, sometimes that journey takes them to the ocean, and they don't realize that's not just a little stream right there. So they jump in, and they start swimming, and they become fish food. Now, if you had some of those lemmings going, you know what, let's take a little detour and walk over here. Maybe you're not going to find as good a place as you had, when you grew up. But you're not going to drown. And because that's where our society's heading, is that big ocean that you cannot swim across. And so we need really to change our values. And, that means there has to be a new, I guess you could say revival, but religion in America seems to just be kind of like put Jesus on a flag and, follow the government and yay, we're Christians. That is not the attitude that Christianity had prior to like World War I. Google that, by the way. I don't know the name of the article, but someone shared that with me on social media. There was an article written by someone who looked at it. Type in religion in America response to World War I and put in follow the state or something like that. Obey government. Because the article was going through all these different religions and how they reacted to World War I. And it was kind of like the start of religion not being like this separate entity that was there that would say, respect the law and stuff like this, but ultimately you have to see your, God and so forth as being the most important factor in your life. And it started turning into this like partnership, and to the point I was watching a documentary a while back, dealing with foreign policy in America, and they had this big mega church where they brought people dressed up as soldiers. And, they were talking about something like, I don't know, Soldiers for Jesus or something like that. And they were in full military uniform. And I'm going, oh my gosh. Seriously. I mean, can you imagine the Apostle Paul or someone bringing in, people to a church meeting dressed as centaurians? Or gladiators? And it's like, yeah, gladiators for Jesus, I mean, come on. We got to get past that. And that's why I say a 60s thing. So you don't have to be conservative to do this. You can be liberal. Heck, you can be some sort of herbal vegan nudist organization or something like that. And it's going to be better than just kind of going along to get along in today's society, because, things are not looking good for staying in that level of just complacency and conformity. So ultimately, and also, if your kids go to school, education's vital, okay? If your kids go to a really good school, you've got a lot of advantages, okay? If your kids go to a school that, my son went to a school for a year that, you got detention even for excused absences over a certain number. And and they were very rural oriented. It was in a working class community. And it was very rural oriented. You had to do this, and you could get in trouble for almost anything. And that's the way a lot of working class schools are, and lower middle class. So what you need to do is you need to supplement your kids' education. You need to make sure that they're learning more than what they're learning in school. And if you're politically and socially aware, then you should make sure that your kids also participate in this. I've seen many families where you have a father and a mother that are like out there doing political stuff and doing all these wonderful things, and they're very knowledgeable, but they think their kids are too young for that. They don't involve them. And then they wonder why in, 10 years' time, they're at like some sort of rally for one cause, and their kids might be like, Mom, Dad, why do you do that? My college professor says that that's really stupid. Or you see what I mean? You've got to involve your families. You can't just treat kids as if they're like kids until they're maybe 18, and then you're like, by the way, let me tell you about what values we have and what and why we believe this way. Well, the kids already formed their values. They've probably been raised on social media, children's networks on TV, and those kinds of things. And so, don't be surprised if they're totally negative to your views from then on. And then you're wondering, what did I do as a parent? Well, you didn't do anything, and that's the problem. You sheltered them. Don't shelter your kids. Let them be involved. I've known families that take their kids like 5, 6 years old and go to a state senate meeting, and the kid, like when they're 7, gets up and gives a 30-second speech for a committee. I mean, think of how wonderful that is for their learning, and usually their kids turn out fantastic. Sometimes a little weird if they're, not weird in a bad way, but like, they're entering college when they're 13, okay, and they're getting straight A's when, in their freshman year. Not bad, obviously, but we've got to pull away, and this, this is a situation in which it does mean the difference between, what not just what direction our country's going to take, but if the country's going to even endure as a strong entity in the future. And so, we can't just give up and say, well, the millennials are a lost cause. Seriously, you can't do that, because when people are in a situation of not knowing which way to go, they need even more help. This is the time when I think churches should be really trying to focus on millennials. We need to reach out. We need not just to preach to the choir. We need to reach out to others who disagree with us. But running short on time here, so that's it for this segment of the show. Hope you'll be back next week for another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. Thank you.